Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing? Why are you showing me a picture of a monarch butterfly, Mickey?
Well, Bob, there are
because
many
we've
meanings.
lost our monarch? We have a fallen monarch?
No, because it has many resonances. One is we're heading into a recount, and remember the butterfly ballot in Florida, and
monarch butterfly,
and remember the Gore aide who foolishly decided he should stake his recount fight on the overturning the votes that were cast with the butterfly ballot. That man was Ron Klain, who is destined to be the chief of staff to what looks like our new president, Joe Biden.
Bad omen. Which is your storyline, though? That we do have a new president with a bad chief of staff or something, or that we're not going to have that new president because of the recounts and so on?
No. It looks like Biden's going to win, and we're going to have the Klain presidency, as my friend John Ellis says. So you better be nice to Ron Klain.
I think it's going to be more like the Jill presidency. But you know, Mickey, before you give up, I would like to bring you some words from your spiritual leader, Steve Bannon.
Isn't he beheading people?
Up. He ain't giving up.
He's beheading people and getting kicked off Twitter.
I thought was a bit much. I don't think he was serious about the beheading. I do have actually another snippet from him suggesting something almost as alarming. But this is not that snippet. This is a snippet that's meant to, from his podcast yesterday that's meant to give you hope, Mickey. You ready?
You're his last defender. Go ahead.
I'm not defending him. I'm just trying to give you hope. I feel genuinely bad for you. My thoughts and prayers go out to you and to Steve. And I want you to hear this.
Action. Donald J. Trump is a very imperfect instrument. Stephen K. Bannon is even a more imperfect instrument. Okay? But divine providence works through President Trump. Divine providence works through every one of you. So pray, but also commit. In your prayers, commit yourself, your whole being, to this fight. We've won this. It's all about driving the second term agenda to make sure that we take our country back and we destroy and crush these elites that have led us into managed decline. That's it. To quote Mark Twain right now, here's how good I feel. I want everybody in this audience, yesterday was not the day of infamy, because now we've got it. We got the program. We got lawsuits everywhere. We got Rudy in charge. Things are going. We're doing good. To quote Mark Twain, I feel like a Christian holding 4 aces. Okay? Because we got 4 aces. We've got the Supreme Court. We've got the state legislatures. We have the House of Representatives and the Senate. And most importantly, we have the American people, the will of the American people. Okay? We have 4 aces.
Do you feel better now? Did that do it?
Not quite. It didn't sound like one of the aces was the presidency.
No. What he's saying is, he's definitely talking about holding on to the presidency. He says the way we're going to hold on to it is we've got this. We control the Supreme Court, meaning the Republican Party. He says we've got the state legislators. Legislatures. You know what that means? That they can. The legislatures, he believes, I think this is controversial, are free to defy the will of the popular vote in appointing the electors to the Electoral College. He's like saying pull out all the stops. And I thought that might give you hope. I'm here to help.
Yeah, no, I'm not for that. I do have hope. There's an argument that, that's increasingly prevalent, which is that yesterday was sort of the best of both worlds in that, the Republicans did incredibly well across the board everywhere except the presidency. So we get rid of Trump and his mishegas, and we get Joe Biden, a crippled Joe Biden, or a hamstrung Joe Biden, and who won't be able to do any of the things one worries about. I specifically worry about obviously immigration, and so it's not really that bad. I'm not sure I quite buy that, but it's possible.
Well, you had said all along that, in a way, the only reason you felt you had to vote for Trump is because you were worried that the Democrats might take the Senate, and you'd be fine with Trump as president and the Republicans controlling the Senate, which isn't quite a sure thing yet, but
Biden
seems
is president.
likely.
With
Biden as president.
It's not completely sure that Republicans will control the Senate. It depends on 2 races in Georgia.
Right.
And so, but if that happens, I don't think he'll be able to get through a big immigration bill, but you never know. I mean, he's hamstrung on so many other fronts, like with maybe with health care, and half the Republican Party is for immigration, loose immigration. They're in the they're in the business lobby, or they're Lindsey Graham, who's already said he's going to talk bipartisan talks about immigration. So Lindsey Graham is already off and running, lobbying for this, and I do think if they don't get rid of the filibuster, there are enough Republicans in the Senate who are terrified of their base to stop it. I mean, the one thing Trump has accomplished is all Republicans are now on one side on immigration, or at least the voters are. But half the senators would sell out in an instant. So I'm not.
Well, it wouldn't take half. It would only take a few, right?
Well, if they don't get rid of the filibuster, yes, but but a few is like 10, right? That's I don't know. It's easy to go through the Senate and name 20 sellouts, but would they dare sell out if they know that they're going to be primaried and maybe beaten? I think maybe not.
So first things first, do you think basically that Trump is toast here? I mean, obviously, by the time we post this, it may be official that Biden has won the electoral vote. It's pretty clear that that's going to be the case. And in fact, that in an ordinary year, they would have already called, Nevada for him and Pennsylvania and so on. But do you think that the avenues Trump is pursuing, ranging from lawsuits to recounts to, I guess, to trying to convince state legislatures to defy the popular vote, do you think any of that stands a chance of defeating Biden?
Slim chance. They're if it's really close, he's crazy not to ask for a recount in a bunch of states. It looks like Arizona, he has a pretty good chance. Pennsylvania's the big one, and if
Georgia's going to be super close, although it looks like
right.
Biden will have won.
Right,
there.
but
Pennsylvania is not going to be nearly as close as Georgia.
Right, but if he loses Pennsylvania, does Georgia do him any good? I haven't followed that.
Well, the whole thing about
it
looks like he's going to wind up at 306 electoral votes, which means that there are no 2 states that he could lose that Biden could lose that would do him in. If I'm understanding the math correctly, because Georgia plus Pennsylvania would be 36. That would leave him at 270, right? So that's the beauty of him being at 306 is Trump's got to do super well through some combination of lawsuits and recounts, and it just gets to seem pretty improbable.
Well, I think you play it out and you file your big lawsuit. I guess a recount is more important now that I think of it in Pennsylvania than the lawsuit. The obvious lawsuit to file is the Constitution gives legislatures a direct authority to control the voting and the procedures of voting, and the Court of Pennsylvania defied the legislature and said you have 3 extra days for mail-in ballots to come in.
Yeah, but they haven't added those votes in, and Trump still loses by a lot.
Right. So I was about to get to that, but I don't see how many votes that gets him.
Not enough.
If that changes the outcome. So the logical thing is just to ask for a general recount on the grounds that maybe somebody will turn up a bushel of votes that were miscounted, or there was somebody made put the decimal point in the wrong place, or added an extra 0, or the standard, Waukesha mistake that turned the tide in Wisconsin. You might discover it, and it's certainly not crazy to think that Philadelphia vote counting is not on the up and up. I mean, there have been indictments after indictment over the years. I had to
I don't know that he has the recount option in Pennsylvania. I don't know what the threshold is. Often the threshold in a given state is like 0.5%. I think he'll probably, I don't think he'll meet that threshold. That would be like 40,000 votes, and I think Biden may well be ahead of, have a bigger margin than that. But in any event, by the time it's over, he's not there yet as we tape this.
I posted something on my site from a guy whose election was stolen from him in Philadelphia, and said the beauty of the Philadelphia machine is they only steal the elections when they really have to, and they might not have to in this case.
I know nothing of what you speak. Here's my question: Trump's, his much criticized two little tantrum speeches that he's given, one at 2:30 a.m. on election night, and then one, I guess, on, was it Wednesday night or Thursday? Anyway, I mean, he's making, without providing any evidence to speak of, he's talking about fraud, elections being stolen, and so on, which is probably pretty close to unprecedented for a president to speak that loosely. I have two questions. Do you have any criticisms of that? Is the first one?
I didn't see what was so incredibly awful about his little talk about fraud. I mean, he people saying there's fraud in Philadelphia is like saying, it's Chile and Alaska. I mean, people have been worried about that for decades. And so
you're saying most elections in Philadelphia are fraudulent?
No, I think Philadelphia is one of the few towns I've been in the United States where everybody on both parties is convinced that the city government and the state government are corrupt. The judges are corrupt. You're not going to get honest election results. You're not going to get honest justice.
Well, that's a little different from documented election shenanigans in election after election.
There's plenty of documented election shenanigans. There are people indicted all the time. There's a guy who was indicted yesterday. Admittedly, he was indicted by Trump's Justice Department, but
but Trump was not just talking about Pennsylvania. He was speaking very broadly. He's going to leave millions and millions of his supporters convinced that the American electoral system cannot be trusted. You don't think that does any damage to democracy going forward or anything? He's provided zero evidence, no evidence. And Mickey, he's president of the United States. For you to say, well, people talk like this. Okay, he's the president. Presidents don't talk like that, okay? And there's a reason for it. They have some respect for the system. They understand how much damage they can do by speaking recklessly. You have no problem with him talking like that and leaving millions of people, including some crazy ones, including some with guns, under the impression that the system is irredeemably corrupt and they should never trust another election.
Well, I think if he follows through on all his lawsuits and loses, there will be a time when he will have to concede.
Oh, he won't. He will never admit this was legitimate. He still doesn't admit that the popular vote in 2016 was legitimate, Mickey.
But he'll have to leave the White House. He
will do that, but doesn't address my question.
Well, then he becomes a raving lunatic in the wilderness, claiming that he was robbed.
No,
even worse than Hillary and Stacey Abrams. So
no, he will be a media magnate with a new media empire that rivals Fox's, and he'll hire Sean Hannity away and do battle with Fox, which he hates. No, that's the word. Is he's so pissed at Fox, he's already scheming.
No, I understand. But Sean, it's hiring. He clearly should start an alternative to Fox, because Fox is really pretty bad. But his will probably be worse. And it's starting with Sean Hannity. That's a big win for Fox. Mickey, getting rid of Sean Hannity would make Fox a much better network.
But the part of Trump's shtick that you are defending now is the Sean Hannity part. Sean Hannity is the one who's fully on board. Not everyone on Fox is, by any means. He's faced a certain amount of criticism from Fox for these unfounded and grave allegations, but not from Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity and you are singing out of the same hymn book.
Look, it seems to me that there's a difference between saying in general his claim like that I really won the popular vote, there was vast voter fraud, which is bullshit. And if there's a very close election, as there is in Georgia and Pennsylvania, saying, there's a history of fraud in Pennsylvania, and they're trying to steal the election from me. That's what George W. Bush said in Florida, I believe, in 2000.
No, he didn't. His brother was governor of Florida. He wouldn't have said that.
I remember James Baker. I think he personally did say that, like maybe to his aides, but
that's different.
But I think James Baker came close to that in his public pronouncements. It'd be good to go back and read that. The Georgia thing is weird because it's run by a Republican, and there's much less grounds for thinking that there's corruption in Georgia than there is in Pennsylvania, and certainly in Arizona too. So we'll see how far he takes it. Keep in mind he can't win if he's animated.
Wait, let's
if he's
be clear.
Animated, you say he's manic, and if he's subdued, you say he's depressed and sullen and defeated. I mean, it's impossible for him to strike.
Who are you talking about? I say these things?
The press says that.
Well, okay, you're talking to me, and let's be clear. I'm not talking about pursuing this through the courts or demanding recounts or anything else. I'm talking about him making very serious and completely unfounded, so far as we know, so far as he has demonstrated, allegations about things in ways that undermine the faith of millions of Trump supporters in democracy. That's what I'm talking about. He's just not speaking the way a president should speak.
We'll see how it ends up. He is speaking more the way the presidents in third world countries speak. I agree, but okay. We'll see how it ends.
One more question about this that gets to this subject of endless fascination to me is like, what is going on in his brain? So the heart of his indictment in one of these things, or to the extent he had evidence, it was of this form. It was like, things were going great. I was ahead. And then suddenly the vote starts turning against me. Well, we all knew that was going to happen because the mail-in ballots in some states couldn't be counted until after the other votes. And we knew they were disproportionately Democratic. And in fact, in Pennsylvania, some states like Pennsylvania released in advance the number of registered Democrats who had returned mail ballots as opposed to Republicans. And you could see the ratio was about 3-1. That's what you would have guessed. And that's what we saw. Now, Trump was talking as if he literally did not understand why you would expect the tide to turn against him in the counting in certain states, as it predictably did. And my question to you is, I know you don't know for sure, is he being dishonest? Does he really know what's going on and he's just acting as if it's evidence of fraud? Or is it possible that a person in his shoes, he's up for re-election, and we're talking about a dynamic, the one I've just described, that people have been talking about and predicting for weeks? Is it possible that he is actually oblivious to this? So is he clueless or dishonest? I mean, those are the only two options.
I thought the rational undercurrent there was he was saying that they were manufacturing ballots.
Well, that's his inference. But his evidence was that, wow, for a while I was doing well, and then suddenly the counting is going in favor of the Democrats. That's not valid evidence unless you've been on another planet for the last month and haven't been. There
was an intermediate paranoid step there where he says, and then all of a sudden everything stopped. And while they ginned up the trucks of fake ballots, he's being paranoid there.
So you think
if the guy vents and says there's fraud for a day, I just didn't, all the shock and horror of these norms for democracy. I mean, Hillary's been claiming the election was stolen by Russians for 4 years. We'll see if he does this for 4 years. I tend to think two things will happen. One, there's this incredible need for a ritual humiliation on the left. So they really want to beat him up. They want to, it's like Tucker Carlson saying, Anderson Cooper saying, well, he's like a fat turtle on his back flailing around. There's just this need for some sort of humiliation. It's not enough for the left. including people who are friends of mine, to have him defeated and leave. He has to be humiliated, and of course, I'm worried that his supporters need to be humiliated too. I'm feeling some of that blowback too. The second thing is, I think the right will be through with him. I don't think he has such an ongoing presence. He failed. He's done. He's going away.
Oh, I disagree. I mean, he's certainly not going to go completely away. If all he wanted to do was be a presence on Twitter with his millions and millions and millions of devoted followers, he would have an impact. But I think he'll go further than that and probably start Trump TV and be a real force. I mean, if he had gotten humiliated, if he had lost Texas and so on, that would be one thing. But he lost in a very close election.
He lost in a very close election, and they gained everywhere else,
right?
Under his, so yeah. So I guess that's right. Okay, you've convinced me that people won't be through with him and say go away. But people, I think, are secretly sick of his craziness, and there'll be a sigh of relief. That was the other meaning of the butterfly, the calming effect of Joe Biden. I think people are looking for that. And even on the right, they don't really want this crazy man back. He might start a third party. There's that possibility. He said this very insightful thing. People always say he's not insightful. He said he was complaining about why he wasn't trending on Twitter. And he said, how can I not be trending on Twitter? I've been trending all my life. And that is, I think, gets to his, some people are motivated by sex, He's motivated by he wants to be trending in the press. So he will do whatever will get him trending in the press.
Right.
Which is probably at least faint a run for office. But it's not clear that he gets that much support when there will be other people running for office. He might start a third party, and then he ends up in Kanye West land. I think he'll have a rougher go of it than he thinks he'll have.
I don't think he'll run in 2024, but I think he'll act like he might for a long time.
Oh, he has to do that just to gin up interest, sure. But anyway, I just think more Republicans will be through with him. There are other people on the horizon. He served a historical purpose. I think his presidency will be looked on way more favorably than it is now, and mainly economically. But I think the Republican Party doesn't want him back, including the voters.
So, yeah, I mean,
I'm talking kind of defeatist here, aren't I? I need some more Bannon. Spine.
I got more Bannon. Here you go. Wait a second.
Can you?
Sure. This'll cheer you up. I mean, you don't like Jack Dorsey, right?
No. Well, I don't know. I don't dislike him as a person. He responded personally to your email, right?
He responded to a DM of mine once.
Yeah.
Here you go. You ready for this? This was, I think, on Wednesday.
Now, today, this moment, in Section 232 of the Defense Act, and send U.S. Marshals out to San Francisco and arrest Jack Dorsey today. I said it on Vice the other day, and that interview was from 2 weeks ago. I knew this moment was going to come.
He's, of course, speaking about Twitter having, I wouldn't say censored Trump. I mean, I think, at that point, I don't know what he was talking about. But Twitter has been, attaching these things to Trump's tweets. They're not keeping you from reading them. They're creating a second click you have to do to read them after you read a little warning.
They must be very proud of themselves because it was a very close election, and they can convince themselves that their suppression, tipped the balance. And they were outrageously censorious down the stretch, and this is now the climax. The climax is we drive a spike through Trump's Twitter feed. I understand why Bannon is pissed off. I mean, it's too late. I mean, the spike on Trump's Twitter feed is too late to affect the election. So that's
I didn't even know how successful. I mean, I think we both agree that when Twitter tried to subdue the initial Hunter Biden news, you had probably more of the Streisand effect than anything else. In any event, neither of us were in favor of that. And I also thought it was a mistake for, I think MSNBC and the networks cut away from Trump when he was making his second round of outrageous claims, which I thought was a mistake. It just feeds conspiracy theories, and it's just, he's the president. Let's see what he's saying.
There was anybody referring to any vote, any election mishaps got this sort of halfway censorship. The whole Hunter. If you referred to the Hunter Biden thing, even if you quoted some judicial opinions, you got censored. And I will be very upset if there wasn't a woke millennial assigned to me to make sure that I was shadow banned. I mean, they have enough of them; they're everywhere. So this is an argument I had at the very beginning of Twitter. I claimed that they actually assigned people to celebrities to make sure that their Twitter replies were sanitized. So Britney Spears, they were all like young adult men, saying nice things about Britney Spears. Somehow that's not the America that I thought I lived in. And so if they have enough to assign every celebrity a minder, they have enough to assign 10,000 bloggers a minder.
I personally don't have high enough self-esteem to think that Twitter would assign a minder to me, even if I were a fringe figure.
No, you're
ideologically
harmless.
Like you are.
You're harmless. You're not a threat like I am.
No, but I mean, even if I were a threat, my sheer stature would not warrant that, is my belief. Whereas you seem to think your sheer stature warrants it.
Don't you have more followers than I do, I think.
No, I just have a better ratio than you.
Well, we all have.
We can pursue that in the parrot room. So here's a question: is there much chance that the Democrats win these two special elections in Georgia?
I would think, not, because history is apparently that the Republicans come out in special elections and they always win them. It's possible that they will be demoralized. I don't think so. They might be fired up. And so I don't. Do they? If the Democrats win both of them, then what happens? Then
I think then you got a 50-50 tie that right. Kamala Harris.
But they have to win both of them.
But
they have to win both of them.
Yeah. They would have to win both of them, but I would figure there's going to be a pretty close correlation in the results. As you said, it's to some extent a turnout question.
But the Purdue Ossoff thing was a close,
that was genuinely close.
Knife edge race. So it's entirely possible that Ossoff could gain some. But the Loeffler thing, if you add Loeffler and the other Republicans' votes together, they decisively beat Warnock. So I would think that the Republicans will win that one.
But who knows? I mean, who knows how much awareness
Loeffler.
there even was? What's that?
It's Loeffler, not Loeffler, I think. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's maybe more work to be done on her having profited from insider pandemic information. That's the allegation, at least. And I think her opponent is a pretty appealing. I find him a pretty appealing candidate. We'll see. You know what I think Biden should do in Georgia? Biden should go down there and say, "Look, I've got this health care plan. It's got the public option, and I think he should add to it. My legislation would give you access to Medicare at age 55, which I think Hillary was proposing when she ran. So isn't that radical? And say, but we can only do it if we can.
Bill Clinton proposed that in his final State of the Union.
Okay, so it's not radical. Say we can only do this if these two senators, if you elect these two senators' office, you can have Medicare at age 55. That could swing it. Isn't that a good idea?
It's a very good idea. He should have emphasized more of these bread and butter issues during the campaign instead of this, as Twitter said, this amorphous soul of the nation crap.
Well, that plus I am like Mr. Anti-Pandemic. I thought that was overdone in along various dimensions.
The pandemic was overdone?
Biden's positioning himself as the one candidate who was prioritizing, killing the pandemic over everything else. I thought that was overdone in ways that may have hurt him.
Yes, and in fact, there was this CNN poll that showed that the pandemic was only the number 3 concern of voters. So I agree with that. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, let's continue with the diagnosis. I mean, first of all, the polls were quite wrong, and I feel a little vindicated in the rant for the rant I did last week when I said, Democrats who think this is in the bag are crazy. It turned to be even though in terms of electoral votes, it may be a somewhat comfortable margin, it's not many votes in 3 states, as with Donald Trump, that may wind up making the difference. And I said, these pollsters say now they know what they did wrong in 2016. Yeah, but in 2016, they knew what they did wrong the time before. You never know what you may be doing wrong this time. And they were obviously doing something wrong because it was a quite systematic, by and large, underestimation of Trump support. It wasn't just random error in both directions.
But for 6 months in the run-up to the election, they were very popular people. So they have a little humiliation now. I mean, and that has to be the New York Times' calculation. I mean, how can Nate Cohn keep his job? He's fucked up twice. How many more times is he allowed to fuck up?
He did.
And the answer is, it helps the Times' bottom line these 6 months when the readers were coming back to see how great things were doing, things were going for the Democrats, that the money rolls in and so what? So they have one day of disappointing, reader disappointment. It's,
well,
it made financial sense for him to get it wrong.
In the defense of these polling gurus, and after this defense, I will return to my indictment of them. Just to be clear, first of all, they did correctly predict who would win the presidential election. When Nate Silver says there's an 89% chance, he's not saying he's going to get 89% of the vote. He's saying there's an 89% chance. And there is something I think some people don't understand about the logic of these predictions. I think a lot of people, probably not you, but a lot of people, if let's say 3 times in a row, Nate Silver says there's a 67% chance that the Democrats win, and every time the Democrat wins, I think most people would say, wow, you're batting 1,000. That's 3 for 3. No, that's not a good record. He predicted that 2 out of 3 times the Democrats would win and 1 out of 3 times the Republicans would win. A perfect record would be you predict the Democrats 67% 3 times in a row and 1 time the Republicans win. That's a perfect record. And people don't get that. And so, the one thing you can say is they did predict the presidential election correctly. They didn't last time. But that all said, they were pretty far off and pretty systematically off. And of course, the aggregators and analysts like Nate Silver and Nate Cohn are not the ones doing the polls, but they went out of their way to piss on the polls like Trafalgar that were right, and to rate them badly. No, Silver was pretty arrogant toward the end.
Yeah, so screw him. And how about some accountability? Silver isn't going anywhere, but would the New York Times keep a reporter that got it wrong twice in a row? So why keep on Nate Cohen if he gets it wrong twice in a row? I don't understand it.
Well, he didn't get the presidential election wrong. I don't know what percentage he assigned.
I think the needles were pretty off.
But I think they got the Senate, a lot of Senate and congressional stuff pretty wrong. And, go ahead.
The worst mistake was the Washington Post, which had a similar bias, predicting that Wisconsin would be a 17-point Biden win at one point. And, of course, it was neck and neck. But go ahead, sorry.
Well, do you have theories about why the polls were wrong?
Well, the standard theory.
What, shy Trump voters?
Shy Trump voters, and people just don't want to talk to any pollsters. It's not, they just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. And I think it may be, I think I told you a couple of months ago, somebody I knew who lived in the D.C. suburbs had said he was worried because his neighbors did not like the social disorder following the George Floyd thing. They kind of were on board with the law and order message, but they were afraid to admit it. And so by his lights, there was a new reason, not for kind of a new category of person not to admit to pollsters if they were favoring Trump.
I mean, the amount of shit I've gotten just being a benign podcaster from people after Biden won saying, you're betraying your Jewish ancestors who were, what about it's always what about the family separations? What about the mothers, would your parents have liked mothers having their childs ripped from them? I mean, just that shows, the social disapproval won't go away for a long time. And why would you want to admit you were for Trump in that kind of environment?
So wait, the logic of the Jewish thing is that Trump is anti-Semitic, or that you should identify with the plight?
Yeah, the identify with the plight because of the Holocaust.
So now there's another thing, though, which is that I think part of the problem with polling is the environment of it is changing so fast. The technological environment of it is, how people, like, it's fairly recently that I just quit answering phone calls from numbers I don't recognize on my cell phone.
Right.
It's like things are changing so fast. And one of the things was the pandemic. Because, the polls historically have assumed certain things. They've always been in a context where both parties had a ground game of kind of the same sort. They went around knocking on doors. Well, this year, because of the pandemic, the Democrats didn't do that. And it's interesting that one of the states in which the polls were pretty much on target, which is Minnesota, is apparently a state in which the Democrats went around and knocked on a lot of doors. Partly because of the influence of Ilhan Omar, who apparently has a very strong operation for doing that. And so it's just, there's so many reasons not to be confident, every 4 years.
What is the connection between knocking on doors and having an accurate poll?
Well, I mean, polls have always been, the reason you have confidence in polls, the reason we had confidence in them 20 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, was, okay, they're generally pretty close, right? But suppose they're close in a context where every year the Democrats go around and knock on doors and generate turnout that way. Well, what if 1 year you suddenly don't do that? Maybe that will reduce Democratic turnout and the polls will be less right. Who knows? In any event, that happened this year.
I see.
So I'm
it's
just
a
saying,
turnout thing.
Well, it could be. There's just so many variables. So relatedly, what are the lessons that Democrats, there will be this soul searching. I mean, once Democrats get beyond the celebration over Trump, there will be recriminations about the House and the Senate.
Well, the recriminations about the House started yesterday on a phone call with Nancy Pelosi, where apparently various representatives just flew off the handle and said, "Stop with this defund the police." I
agree.
Stuff, and you're threatening our seats. You've cost us. I mean, they came perilously close to losing control of the House. Shockingly,
yeah.
I mean, they may lose like. I tried to check. I couldn't quite figure out. They could easily lose 10 or 15 seats. If you remember when Newt Gingrich, that happened to Newt Gingrich, he had to quit. After promising a win, he lost like 10 or 12 seats. He was out of there. Now, Pelosi, that's not going to happen to Pelosi, but it's a big deal.
A question that if we don't get to it now, we could get to it in the prayer room. I'm going to write it down. It's like, what has happened with Newt Gingrich? He's kind of like Giuliani. He could have gone down as like a not crazy person, but anyway,
happens to all of us.
Well, not all of us actually, but I recognize that it happens to some of us, Mickey, and I want you to know that my thoughts and prayers are with you today.
So the recrimination has started. The main thing that happened, I think, is with the Latino vote. And if you remember, there's this theory that what's important is identity politics, mean races sort of vote with their race. That's their most important characteristic. So if we're deporting a lot of Latinos and blocking a lot of Latinos from coming in, Latinos are going to be pissed off and they're not going to vote for Trump. Well, that took a huge beating because Latinos, especially in certain states like Texas but in other states,
Florida
as well, Florida, voted for Trump in unprecedented numbers. So the idea that Trump's immigration policy would piss off Latinos because they think of themselves primarily as Latinos, right, was discredited. And Michael Lynn's theory, which I think was right, which is, Latinos basically assimilated into the regular working class. They think of themselves as white. They think of themselves as workers. Their main thrust isn't I am a Latino. It's I'm an American worker. And if you have a guy like Trump who somehow is raising their wages or doing other things they like, they're going to vote for him. Right. This was the whole basis for Nate Silver's start in polling was all, if you remember, he picked every race right because he looked at the racial composition of every state and said, Hillary's going to get this, Obama's going to get this. If it's a white state, Hillary's going to get more. If it's a black state, Obama's going to get more. And I thought this is insane because it was all based on that race determined your vote. But it turned out he was right. He got everything right. So, and if you look at Ron Brownstein's theory of the future Democratic majority, it's the new America where, it's based on the coalition of the ascendant, and one of the members of that coalition were Latinos, because of course Latinos vote as Latinos as a bloc. And I just think that took a huge hit. That's the main battleground, I think.
Yeah, it's it's true that pollsters have historically, I think, treated these ethnic groups as kind of, homogeneous, kind of variables in their own right. And one thing they do is if they see that their poll is like undersampling blacks, if they're getting, less of a response from a fewer blacks than are in the population as a whole, they adjust, they inflate the responses of what blacks they do talk to. Same with Latinos. And of course, one thing that happened in 2016 is that they didn't realize that college-educated versus non-college-educated whites, that should also be treated in the same way. You should treat that as an important kind of homogeneous kind of variable, each of those. But I agree that, yeah.
I've never understood this weighting business, because isn't the whole idea to randomly sample a statistically accurate a picture of the whole population and then see how people vote, and you don't adjust the weights to make sure that that there are more blacks or whites. If there are more blacks, they'll show up in your sample.
Well, no, but they don't sometimes, maybe because they're less inclined to answer their phone or something. That's what happens, is that they become aware of certain subpopulations that are underrepresented in the poll, and whether they then inflate the responses of that subpopulation in keeping with that knowledge depends on whether they think of that subpopulation, I think, as a coherent kind of variable, or at least, there's some other assumptions. But anyway, I basically agree with you that if that's becoming a less valid assumption for ethnic groups, that's in principle just generically a good thing. I think you want a country in which race is not a predictor, right?
It's a very good thing. It means that people like me should be less culturally worried about Latinos because they're basically Americans like everybody else.
Well, that's the flip side of this. You should worry less about immigration. Thank you for handing me this talking point. You should worry less about immigration because the people have said all along, assimilation happens. These people, they get jobs, they become middle class, they speak English, they don't commit crimes, blah, 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 has been validated by this election. Thank you for that talking point.
You're welcome, but they still lower wages while they're doing it. So if you let in,
not once they've done it.
If you let in, of course, if you let in 20 million unskilled Latinos and they immediately assimilate, they're still going to lower wages.
You can say the same thing.
The economic argument against immigration is still there. The cultural argument against immigration is weakened. I agree with that. It's always been clear that Latinos assimilate quite quickly. They intermarry at high rates. So I've never been that worried about Latinos assimilating into American culture. The only problem is we're right next door to Mexico. That's the only problem.
I suspect that if you, it's complicated. I would guess that a lot of the Latinos who voted for Trump have actually become a part of, are no longer at the really low wage level, dragging down the wages of people who are making $14 an hour. That would be my guess.
I wouldn't be so sure. And also, why let it more? Anyway, the point is assimilation and they can still high immigration can still destroy America if it removes the possibility of unskilled workers earning a decent living, no matter how assimilated the new workers who are lowering wages are. They're two different arguments.
By the way,
both involve transforming America, but I agree that if they're all Latinos and Latinos assimilate incredibly quickly, the cultural argument fades.
I would argue that to some extent the economic argument fades, at least to the extent that this means that what downward pressure is exerted on wages is exerted temporarily by people who arrive, and increasingly they and their offspring are not exerting.
Well, it's always temporarily, but
but
we're heading for a situation where we have a continual flow. So as soon as they move up the ladder, another huge
it's not
cohort comes in, and the result is that wages at the bottom. Like I said last time, we don't have to speculate about this. We ran the experiment. Trump has held the lid on immigration.
Oh God, we had this argument.
Wages at the bottom have risen. There was a chart that Pethokakis, is that the guy's name, posted right after the election, right after Trump did way better than expected.
I argued last time,
and it showed that wages at the bottom grew much faster than anywhere else, and so
I argued last time that was at best a simplistic argument. People can listen to that conversation if they want, but we've had that argument.
I don't remember anything you said about it being simplistic.
I said, look, as the unemployment rate goes down and down and down, and it did that in more or less exact continuation of the trend under Obama. Unemployment rate's been going down since 2009. You get to a point where upward pressure is going to finally be exerted on low wages. That's the way it works.
Right, but immigration's a factor because usually what happens is when you reach that low point, they open the floodgates to new labor and more people start crossing illegally to join our hot economy. And if you put a lid on that, that allows this process that you just described. That would reduce the
effect, Mickey, but just observing that there has been the effect tells you basically nothing except that, one thing you already...
because we've been through a lot of boom and bust cycles and wages at the bottom have not risen as fast as they're doing now. So there was some new factor here. If you look at, Mickey, this is an ongoing secular trend in capitalism which I wrote a book about and which everybody accepts. I didn't say anything new. That the payoff to education was greater, and people without an education were having a much harder time earning a living during boom cycles and bust cycles. So, it's not like the fact that it happened is a bigger deal than you're saying.
Well, I would just say last time the unemployment rate was this low, or at least as low as it was pre-pandemic, was so long ago that God knows how many variables were different, including the one you emphasized.
It was the late 90s.
Right.
I believe.
That's what I mean. By the way, last thing on possible effects, explanations for the bad performance of the polls. I still think that a thing that I was worried about as of last week, which is that there had been clear tightening of the polls. One explanation was that the Hunter Biden stuff was seeping in. It was being pushed very hard in various parts of the ecosystem. And that since the polls basically froze time as of like Thursday or something before the election, if its effect continued and the polls continued to tighten, that would be significant, and it wouldn't surprise me if that is part of the explanation. But I digress.
the highfalutin explanation of the election, I guess, involves economics and the interests of the working class and Latinos, et cetera, et cetera. The cheesy explanation, which you've just hit on, I think is entirely plausible, is the gatekeepers failed. The Hunter Biden news did get out. It started to change the election in Trump's favor, and two factors prevented him from winning. One is it started too late. So Rudy should have done his act a couple weeks earlier. And second, because of the pandemic, a lot of the mail-in ballots were already in the can. So it was too late for people to change their votes.
Well, it was too late for that.
I think that the Hunter Biden story having traction is a big part of it.
Yeah, okay. So we agree. I don't think most people do agree. But I think that actually happened. And as far as when Rudy got it out, I think as far as the people who voted on Tuesday, I think he got it out at the right time for them because they didn't have any more stuff to get out. And the more you reflect on it, the more you realize, well, it isn't really a massive indictment of Joe Biden.
Because of early voting, that was too late. There is some I've seen some statistics showing that like searches for Hunter Biden matched searches for other topics so that it did get out despite the efforts of the gatekeepers. Unfortunately, they were on the website of this guy, Ali Alexander, who I've referred to before.
Oh,
who apparently is highly dubious. Yeah, so I can't vouch for that, but I think that Ben Smith was crowing, last week that gatekeeping worked. We succeeded in squelching. They should be proud of themselves. They succeeded in squelching the Hunter Biden scandal, and I don't think they did.
Well, yeah, we talked about that. He and Ross Douthat both said that. One virtue of saying it is that then they can't be accused of having blown, having gotten Trump reelected if he gets reelected. But the so what else? So anyway, in terms of the Democratic recriminations, there's going to be an anti-wokeism argument, as we've suggested, right? That's made on the basis of this. Right. And I'm okay with that. Now, on defund the police, which is part of the anti-wokeism argument, it's not like Nancy Pelosi was out using the phrase, and God knows Joe Biden was actively rejecting it. It's more like they were concerned about alienating a certain part of their base, and that made it hard to separate themselves from that language as clearly as they might have otherwise. But I think, what about anti-wokeism more broadly?
He picked Kamala Harris as his running mate, and Kamala Harris was spouting that stuff for an entire primary campaign. So, and I'm sure that Biden uttered the word systemic racism at some point in the campamping, even though it's not sort of thing that he says. One takeaway I think probably will be that the law and order piece finally had some impact. Yes,
not just law and order, but anti-wokeism, the critique that the critique of identity politics,
like his answer to the transgender mom, where he said he seemed to be saying it was perfectly okay to have was the kid 8? Have an 8-year-old decide that they want to be a different sex. That was a little bit of wokeism that crept into the debate. The whole, Yeah,
it was a town hall, I think. But I think the
You're right, it was a town hall.
The question, my critique of the progressive response to George Floyd was like, how many policies are they even advocating, much less enacting, that actually help the average low-income black person very much, as opposed to helping black elites? I guess it's great that Joy Ann Reid's got a show on MSNBC now, but that's just one person. And, this is, I would like to see this theme examined more closely in the postmortem.
I would sort of like to see the transgender theme ditched entirely, but
I don't know how many
That's
people
just
care
me.
about that. I mean, look, transgender people should have rights and respect
Of
and
course.
everything else, but whether that's a winning political issue to emphasize a whole lot is another question.
Well, but it gets more extreme, and B, it's overemphasized, and when you get parents changing the sex of their young kids, that's ridiculous.
So one question, I mean, in 2018, the Democrats did well in the House elections, and the argument was it was because Nancy Pelosi ran a bunch of moderates, right? Didn't they run basically, leave aside the rhetorical atmosphere, weren't they fairly moderate people who got defeated this time, the Democratic candidates?
I think so. I think they were the same sort of people.
So you think they were victims of the wokeism atmosphere emanating from the George Floyd protests, or what? I mean, why did it work in 2018 and not now?
Wait, what worked in 2018? Sorry,
Running moderate Democratic candidates. That was the formula for success, supposedly. And I don't think the candidates themselves this time were much to the left of that, were they? Maybe I'm wrong. I don't really keep up with this
I don't
stuff.
think so either. But it might have been the background noise. I find it baffling because Republican congressional candidates are generally a bunch of worthless Chamber of Commerce tax cutting types. So why were they at all appealing unless they were the way to stop the Democrats from going insane, which is, I think probably what happened. It's weird that there are these four seats in Orange County that the Democrats managed to flip last time. I think they're losing all four this time.
Huh.
Now, it being Orange County, they're going to be counting the ballots for another 17 days, but that's the way it looks now, and I don't know. I don't understand that. So. I think, the self-serving explanation would be people kind of like Trumpism. They just don't like Trump.
Well, that's the other question is, in what form will Trumpism live on? You seem to think he won't be the leader of it. I'm not so sure, but, that's one way of asking how the Democrats should respond to this. I think they should recognize, I would have said this before the election, Trumpism in some sense will live on. I mean, look, suppose he had gotten 4 or 5 million fewer votes as the polls predicted. So what? It's still a ton of Americans who are voting for him. And he's such a weird guy that you got to take that into account and ask yourself, why is this happening? Because in some ways it is baffling. He's a total creep. And so far as I can tell, he's kind of nuts and an idiot. And yet, he's getting all these votes. There must be a reason. I think Democrats should take seriously that he represents something deep.
Well, I agree. I always say focus on his policies for that. Mm-hmm. And there's this, every time a phrase bubbles up in the mainstream media, it often bubbles up for a reason. And there's this phrase, there's just all this worry about polarization. That's the word of the month. And
it's a word of the year, and I think it's a real concern. But go ahead.
But doesn't it just mean, damn, they're not buying the shit we're selling?
No.
Here we're selling these wonderful democratic things, and those people out there, they're polarized. They're not buying it.
No, it means more than that. It means there are demonstrated things like that. People's attachment. People vote for Republican candidates less. And it works on the other side too, in the Democratic side. But they vote for their candidates less out of support for the candidates per se than out of hatred of opposition to the other side. It's negative partisanship, and I think it's been pretty well documented that that's a growing thing. And you see it with like the way the resistance suddenly became Cold Warriors, because once they associated Trump with Russia. And by the way, back to your thing about Hillary complaining that Russia lost her the election. Well, I was a Russiagate agnostic, and I remain one. But it is fair to say that had it not been for the email hacks, which presumably were done by the Russians, of the DNC and of Podesta, she probably would have won. Had it not been for a lot of things, she would have won. It was a close election. Had she not uttered the phrase deplorables, she probably would have won. Who knows? But anyway, that's not... That degree of Russian association with Trump's victory, I think, is not crazy. But in any event, once the resistance became convinced that Russia backed Trump, then suddenly they were talking about Russia in ways that we used to associate with, Cold War Republicans. And that is negative partisanship. That is polarization. You hate the other candidates so much that you're willing to flip on an issue.
Right, but it's not like racial tribalism where, I'm a Greek, you're a Turk. There's no way I'm going to become a Turk or you're going to become a Greek. So that antagonism is sort of permanent. There must be some reason why the tribe starts hating the other side, and that gets back to issues. There's some reason why all those rubes out in the rural areas don't like the nice liberal policies that the urban liberals are serving them. It's not just tribalism. It has an ultimately rooted in some sort of difference. It's not just that they're city slickers. It's that they're proposing a bunch of stuff that the rural people don't buy.
I think it's a lot of things. Some of it is policies. I think it also has to do with the media landscape. The modern media landscape, including social media, the internet, permits a degree of fragmentation that just was not possible when we were all watching the same shit on TV. That was a very different world. I think it has to do with growing income inequality, and I think it has to do with tactical choices made by both parties. Certainly, I'm most aware of the ones made on the Republican side, going back to Newt Gingrich, who began identifying Democrats as an oppressive cultural elite who hold ordinary Americans in contempt. That was a tactical decision, and the Republicans have been playing it up ever since. And I'm not saying Democrats have made no tactical decisions that have also had a tribalizing effect, but I think that's part of it.
Well, the problem is that they do hold ordinary Americans in contempt.
Well, some do, some don't. Do you think I do?
No, but half the people around here in L.A. who are
they may not. But the average Trump supporter looks at somebody like, well, I don't want to overgeneralize. A number of Trump supporters would look at someone like me and just based on a superficial description, think I hold them in contempt. And actually, I demonstrably don't, and have spent the last 4 years trying to separate myself from people who do.
But it's not like Gingrich was making stuff up out of whole cloth. In economic theory, the idea is we have a free market and we have free trade and free immigration. They're winners and losers, and we should just let the winners be winners and let's compensate the losers. Well, these are the losers, right? And A, the compensation systems never work, and B, the winners tend to look down on them as losers because that's the way they're called, and they're stuck out there in the hinterlands with their coal miners, and they should learn to code, and and if they don't, that's their fault. And there is that undercurrent of social inequality. So I think that's a huge driver. Yes,
I'm not even sure that's part of the way elites think. I think elites hold in contempt. A lot of liberal elites hold in contempt the values, the positions on the social issues and things like that, and But I don't think it's like what Republicans are stereotyped as thinking about unemployed blacks. I don't necessarily think that's part of the analysis. I just think they don't. But that is part of the indictment that Trump makes, that they are happy to fatten up their investment portfolios, even if it means that your job goes to China. That's probably true, but it's not because the people with the portfolios are thinking about the middle Americans and thinking they deserve this fate. They're just not thinking about the middle Americans, period. It's flyover country.
That's true, but when they do rise up and promote somebody like Trump, then the contempt comes out. I'm going to go, if you talk to the viewers for like 1 minute, I'm going to go get a Sudafed, it's going to make me much smarter.
Okay.
I'm okay. Hang on.
Okay. Well, Mickey is gone. We've switched his coffee to Uban. I think that's actually an old commercial where they did that. While the person was gone. So anyway, I am right about everything. Mickey is wrong. His earbuds still aren't in, so he doesn't know what I'm saying. Oh, hi, Mickey. I was just paying you a compliment.
A portrait of addiction at its worst.
It's Mickey. It's too late for that. I mean, that'll kick in the middle of the parrot room. But those people already like us. You know, the ones we're trying to win over.
I know,
are the
but
people who are not yet patrons, who have not yet gone to patreon.com/parrot room and express their support for our endeavor by signing up.
Go to the parrot room because that's when the Sudafed kicks in.
Right. That's our pitch.
That's our new slogan. Yeah.
That's our pitch. Exactly. The parrot room where the Sudafed kicks in.
Where the drugs take hold.
I used to look forward to having a cold so that I could take Sudafed because it was such a pick-me-up. But I couldn't take it if I didn't have a cold because then it would just make me like edgy and nervous. It would only hit the sweet spot if I was like kind of congested. So I would welcome that feeling of congestion back when I was young and reckless. Now I condemn the use of Sudafed.
There's a crazy theory I have, which is completely irrelevant to everything.
More than one. Which one is this?
If you have allergies, you're happy to get a cold. You feel better because then your whatever it is in your system that fights germs actually has something real to fight against, as opposed to having an allergic reaction where it fights against things it's not supposed to. So a mild cold is actually really good if you have allergies. Speaking of this,
anyway, there's good news on the COVID front. Would you like to hear it?
Yeah.
2 pieces of good news. One is that, now granted these experiments have been done on ferrets, but we have a lot in common with our ferret brothers. And the initial finding is that there is a nasal spray that renders them resistant to infection by COVID for 24 hours. And if it turns out it has that effect on us, it's just like you spray it in your nose and then you go to a Trump rally and you're good. Oh, I'm sorry, Mickey. There won't be any more Trump rallies, will there? Sorry.
No,
my bad. A sore subject. I'm sorry.
That's not true. You're saying he's going to continue and why, and there was a common theory that he's just going to keep giving rallies because he likes them. And that's what gets him off. And also, if he runs again, of course there are going to be Trump rallies.
Yeah, that's kind of a downer. The other good news, I was talking to someone, I won't tell you who it was, but he's at a major corporation, and one of his jobs is figuring out ways they could make the fight against COVID better. And he said that the finding there's increasing confidence that if you could diagnose all COVID cases early, within the first couple of days, and get the people one of 2 things. Either I think it's called the polyclonal antibodies that you find in the blood plasma aggregates that they can give people that comes from people who have been infected, or the monoclonal antibodies of the kind that Trump took from, what is it, Regeneron or some company. He says if you catch people early enough within the first couple of days, get these therapies to them right away, or one of these therapies, there's just almost no chance they die. It's really dramatic.
Well, there is this bizarre phenomenon where in some states like California, we have a rise in COVID cases. The second spike is happening, and the deaths are sort of elevated too. Okay, but in Sweden and New York City. There's a huge fucking spike. It's like a rocket to the moon, okay? And the deaths have barely budged. And it's same with New York City. Big spike, deaths have barely budged. So what is it that's different about Sweden and New York and California? It seems to me it's a mystery to me why this is. It a different strain in those places? So that they're getting a milder strain, they're getting a lot of COVID, but nobody's dying? Is it that there are more treatments, there are more better treatments? They've gotten so good at dealing with this in New York that very few people die. I think that's possible. But why wouldn't we be good in California too? It's
Well, also in New York, a lot of the vulnerable did die the first time around. They're gone. They can't die again. But
that's not true. That doesn't apply to Sweden.
No, I guess it doesn't. I don't know. I mean, the death number is starting to creep up again, but I don't think it's ever going to be as high relative to the case number as it was first time around.
Well, I'm deeply worried about long-term effects, even if you don't die.
Yeah, that is a great.
I'm not sure the monoclonal antibodies will solve all those problems, will they?
Well, I think if you fight off the infection in the early days, I would presume that you're heading off a number of the enduring kind of ancillary effects. But I do think one of the great failures of leadership, not just in America, but I guess everywhere, because we still don't have good data on this, is not doing enough in the way of systematic follow-up studies to have an idea of, I mean, we all know what kinds of things can happen. You can lose your sense of smell. You can, I guess there could be some cognitive effects and so on, but we have no sense of the likelihood of these, right? I would like to know what percentage of people have some identifiable side effect 2, 3, 4 months down the road. We should have data by now, and I'm not. I'm starting to see some kind of scattered studies, but we don't know much.
Right.
I think.
Can we talk for a bit about how dreary the Biden administration will be? I mean, the first problem is he's going to try to be eloquent. Okay, so basically, we basically elected him as, okay, you're a nobody, you're better than this crazy man we have. Just sit in the White House and do nothing for 4 years, and we'll be happy. Okay,
I'm on board.
Keep things calm and okay, and we can go on with our lives. Okay, he doesn't want that. He wants to be a eloquent uniter. So he's going to be constantly attempting these flights of rhetoric, which we're going to have to pretend that we like, and he's going to be constantly attempting this outreach to the other party, which will either be phony or it's not going to be as big a deal as he thinks it is, and he's not going to get. The press is going to try to laud this, and it's not going to be very interesting. Second, it's basically the triumph of K Street. So it's back to normalcy, back to what one called the swamp, and gridlock is probably good for K Street. So there has to be the threat that something will happen, but it's big money if you just block a bunch of bills and throw sand in the gears of the machine. So that's going to be very dreary. And the third thing is, of course, I think there's going to be a huge fucking surge at the border, and so the administration will be very quickly plunged into a sort of crisis. And I don't quite know how Biden deals with that.
So you're predicting an influx of people. You mean a surge toward the border, or an actual influx beyond into the country?
Well, both. I mean, they're sitting in Mexico now celebrating because Biden has won, and soon they're going to head for the border and claim asylum. And so the question is, will Biden follow through with his campaign rhetoric and basically let them all in on the grounds with a slip saying, be sure to show up in court, and then they don't really have to show up in court, and then there'll be another group of people that just comes illegally across the border the way they used to. So they're both crises, and the press won't care about the illegals, but they will care about long lines backed up at the ports of entry claiming asylum. And overflowing the jails, and soon you'll see, you may see kids in cages again. Not Trump's innovation, it was Obama's innovation.
I predict you won't see that.
Well, they're going to try everything they can not to do that, which means releasing people, basically. So.
Well, I have no intuition about this, except that possibly you will, in retrospect, have overstated the case. But I'm more concerned. Like, I was looking forward to actual healthcare stuff. Now, we're going to get none of that, I assume. I mean, first of all, is McConnell going to do what he did with Obama, which is just go into opposition? Like, his job is to make life hard on Joe Biden, period. Make sure that Democrats lose the next election, period. And we're going to see essentially no collaboration between the White House and, assuming it's a Republican-controlled Senate, the Senate.
That's a good question, and the extent to which the ongoing bloodbath in the Republican presidential field does that, if a guy like Josh Hawley, who I think advocates a sort of fairly robust government that helps people, so he might not be completely unamenable to adding a few things onto Obamacare. If he gets traction, and the old Paul Ryan people who mainly care about cutting government and cutting taxes and cutting the deficit, if they're routed, you would think that would affect how McConnell approaches this sort of thing. It may not have to wait until 2024 to have an impact. It might have an impact immediately if it changes the way a guy like McConnell thinks. And he of course has to respond to his caucus. So, if the caucus are a bunch of Hawleyites, that might change things. Of course, the interesting thing is, of course, Marco Rubio has a new Svengali. You're aware of this?
No, who's the new Svengali?
There's a guy named, I think it's Michael Needham, who was he was the sort of wild man at the Heritage Foundation, and he's now Rubio's chief of staff or chief guru, and he's steering him in a Hawley-like direction of a populist, not so almost liberal on government direction,
but anti-immigration.
Well, that's what he says, but Rubio's a total weak read on that. That's one of I have two problems with Rubio. One is he's a total sellout, weak read, waiting to happen on immigration. He's proven that before. His original position was soft on immigration. Then he posed as a hardliner when the Tea Party came in. Then he sold them out immediately as soon as he got to Congress. So obviously his natural position is sellout, and he's responsive to business interests. Will want him to go in that direction. And the second thing is he doesn't vet. He has a horrible checkered past that will come out.
Elaborate.
I don't. Well, his. We talked about this. His father basically worked for the Scarface in Miami.
I think we talked about it either off camera or in the parrot room.
Yeah. So he has. Romney vetted him for his vice president, and he didn't pass. Okay, forget that guy.
But it's not his fault who his father was, and surely you're not saying that he helped his father sell cocaine or anything, are you?
It wouldn't be his father. It wouldn't be his. You so shocked me that the pile of books that I'm balancing my camera on collapsed. It wouldn't have been his father. I'm not going to say he didn't.
You're not going to say. So you're not going to say that Marco Rubio does not have a past dealing cocaine?
Not dealing cocaine. There's a lot goes into
packaging it.
You said that.
I'm just asking. I'm not alleging anything.
You said that. I didn't. That was a very good guess on your first guess.
So you're saying Marco Rubio packaged cocaine?
No, I'm just saying that would be where it came in if it was, and also he has relatives who were drug dealers who he did not cut loose, and in fact appeared in public with them long after their convictions and rehabilitation.
And you're saying they used him to package their cocaine, if I understand you correctly.
I'm not. I'm just saying if there was a problem. You said
it would have come while he was packaging.
You said he's not responsible for his father, but he is responsible for things that he did, and I'm saying, well, let's look at those things.
Where can we go for further reading on this interesting subject, Mickey?
The best that's been written so far is Annie Bardak's Politico piece on Marco Rubio. If you go to it and search for Scarface,
you got to really read between the lines, I think, on that one, don't you?
Nah, not so far. You have to. search for the word Scarface, and that's a good foothold. Foothold into the issue. But I don't know. I mean, that just means he won't win, and doesn't mean he's not a good guy. I just think he's a complete. He's a little like Kamala, not quite like Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is an empty vessel of ambition. She'll basically do whatever it takes.
Well, so is Marco Rubio.
I think Rubio has some.
He was born a neocon? Was he born wanting to invade countries?
I don't think neocon is part of it, but I do think sort of being a vague pro-business, pro-immigration person is he has some core like that, as opposed to Kamala, who has no core. I don't think being a neocon on foreign policy is his core.
It's just part of his shtick.
He just adopted it, yeah. But
so what about judgeships? I mean, like federal judges. Is McConnell like what? I noticed that a number of the federal judges who ruled in favor of Trump in recent weeks on electoral issues are people Trump had appointed that filled vacancies that arose and persisted during the Obama administration. Now, was that because McConnell refused to let Obama fill the judgeship position? I wasn't paying that much attention. And if so, is that going to happen again? Like, Biden can't get his federal judges in, and then they just wait until there's a Republican question, and because that scares me.
Good question. The answer is I don't know. Early on in Obama, the left was upset because he wasn't filling the judges fast enough. So part of it may have been his fault. But I do think Obama sort of blocked a lot of them, and McConnell blocked a lot of them, and I assume he'll try to do that again. And if you look at the portion of the judiciary that was filled by Trump, he didn't come close to establishing Republican control over the judiciary. He maybe filled I once saw a chart on this. It just maybe he was fighting against decades and decades of Democratic appointments, and so I think he maybe has filled a third of the judiciary. I mean, it wasn't like a Republican takeover.
So, Mickey, here's a riddle. Guess how long we've been recording?
An hour.
Hour and 22 minutes.
Here,
you're not taking the hint here, Mickey. I'm trying to usher both of us off stage.
I felt now that the Sudafed is kicking in.
Uh-oh.
I haven't communicated how I haven't put my ass on the line with a prediction that in 6 months there's going to be a wave of disillusion with the dreariness of the Biden administration. He's Jimmy Carter without the charisma. Okay, it's not. Yeah. You're gonna. At best, we'll say we don't care about politics anymore. Let's go live our lives.
That would be a big improvement.
And that is what people wanted, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't. And I would say that's a good thing too. But it's going to be worse than that.
In what way?
We're going to say we elected well, first there's the health possibilities. Okay, we elected but mainly we elected this sort of uninspired Juan guy who isn't mobilizing anybody, isn't getting anything done. The swamp has taken over Washington again. Trump, he was a crazy guy, but there were some good things he did. And the icing on the cake, and I think what will ultimately turn, what would turn the public against Biden is foreign policy. If he somehow engages in some blob-like activities that wind up getting Americans killed, you're the judge of that.
I mean, I think sadly Americans by and large don't care that much about foreign policy unless it does lead to fairly large numbers of Americans getting killed. And I doubt he'll do anything like that. I fear he will disappoint me on foreign policy, but I don't think he'll have to pay a big political price for that.
There was a story that Mitch McConnell, as the price if he retains control of the Senate, he was going to demand that Biden appoint more conservative cabinet appointees, and the conservative nominee to state was Tony Blinken, the one that McConnell supposedly wants. What does that mean? I don't understand.
Tony Blinken is going to be influential in any event. He has been with Biden a long time, and I think the main question...
I understand. But what is it? Why would McConnell want him, and who are his opponents? Are his opponents more anti-war than Blinken or more pro-war than Blinken?
Oh, there are definitely opponents that are more anti-war than Blinken. We'll be getting into this in the Nonzero newsletter, to which people can subscribe at nonzero.org. We'll be assessing the candidates for foreign policy positions in the coming weeks. But I would just quickly say that, Blinken, sadly, is the one who's closest to Biden of all the foreign policy people, probably. And he is one of the most hawkish. And you can imagine a number of people who would be better at state than him. William Burns would be one person that people are talking about who would be a big improvement over Blinken would be Chris Murphy. They're also talking about Chris Coons, who probably wouldn't be that much better than Blinken from my point of view. But in the end, if Blinken's not Secretary of State, he's probably going to be National Security Advisor. And sometimes that person just winds up calling the shots, and the State Department is their servant. So how important a Secretary of State even is varies from administration to administration, and how important a National Security Advisor is. So I'm afraid we will not have an administration free of the influence of Tony Blinken, much as I would love that.
There must be worse people than Blinken buzzing around Biden
that are plausible.
I mean, there was a whole, like with Al Gore, Marty Peretz was an advisor to Al Gore. There were all sorts of neocons buzzing around Al Gore.
Well, his vice presidential candidate, Lieberman, was a nightmare in foreign policy.
So surely on that spectrum, Blinken is in the middle. So who are the people who are on the right who are influencing Biden? Who are Well,
he is a Democrat, so it doesn't go as far to the right. It's not like John Bolton is in the running.
Are we sure Marty Peretz doesn't have any influence on Joe Biden?
I think Marty's influence has waned in a pretty broad-based sense since you and I worked for him. I don't know. There are others, I wouldn't particularly welcome, but look, will he, look, a big litmus test will be the Iran thing. Do you have someone who is willing to just restore the Iran nuclear deal, go back to the status quo ante, demand nothing from Iran beyond what they promised to do as part of the deal, and just get that deal done? Or is it somebody's going to demand all this new shit? Wait, what about your conventional ballistic missiles? What about your presence in Syria and blah, blah, blah? If it's somebody who does the latter, which Blinken is much more inclined to do, I think, than some, it could be a long time before you've got the Iran deal back in effect. That will be one big litmus test, I think.
You think Blinken is inclined to actually not just go back to the Iran deal?
Well, there's a lot of pressure to move the goalposts on the deal. Trump just reneged on the deal. And one thing you could do is say to Iran, how about we just go back to where we were, right? Seems easy. But there's a lot of pressure. This is the trouble with the blob. There is a lot of pressure on the Biden administration, I guarantee you there will be, to not settle for that. No, now we want a bunch of other things from Iran that we have no right to ask, because supposedly they are a sovereign nation, and if they're not breaking any international rules, why do we have the right to demand these things of them?
Right.
But that's going to be the big issue.
Oh, okay. Well, so maybe as long as he doesn't get Americans killed, he won't. The dreariness of Biden will not come from foreign policy.
But he will leave them. The fear is that he will leave them in harm's way. That 4 years from now, they will still be in Iraq. They will still be in Syria. They will still be in Afghanistan. And then there's the drone strike questions. And the concern is just that he will not move the ball in a progressive direction.
You're progressive. You're talking like a Trumper.
Well, of course, that is one of the nominal overlaps between the Trump talks and a progressive foreign policy. But, of course, he was unable to walk the walk in the end, so it didn't matter.
Yeah. There's huge overlap. I mean, I've made my point about Trump moving the party to the
And I made my point about us having been on this for an hour and a half and still having a pair room to go, but don't let me stop you, Mickey.
I mean, Trump has helped end polarization by moving the Democrats to the left.
Now that is a slate pitch. That is a slate pitch. Trump has helped end polarization. That's an angle I haven't heard.
There you go. If you look at the actual policies, he's moved the Republican Party closer to the Democrats, so they should be able to do business. The real sticking points are immigration and abortion. Those are the two issues where, like, the positions seem irreconcilable. On healthcare, Trump did the bidding of the right on healthcare, but there's no reason why his successor should, and there's every sign that Trumpism does not mean the government doesn't have a national healthcare program.
I think we should continue this in the parrot room.
So anyway.
We're old men. We are old men. Our energy is waning. We have a whole nother conversation.
My energy is not waning. I just
took my Sudafed. Because you take performance-enhancing drugs.
I'm on the upward slope, Bob.
I know. And if you could FedEx some of that stuff in my direction in record time, I'd be with you. But I'm not.
Okay.
So I'm just relying on
final prediction. A final prediction?
Yeah.
What's going to be the state of play next week when next we meet again?
Well, that's a good question. Trump, I think, will still be... The question is whether he will be pursuing victory in the courts in a kind of pro forma, low-energy way, or at the other extreme, he will be vigorously, enthusiastically pursuing all these avenues and ginning up actual things like violence. And by the way, he spoke implicitly approvingly of some violence he had seen. In one of his talks, he said, and they put the tape over the windows so the people outside couldn't see, and they, quote, became somewhat violent in a clearly kind of approving way. Bannon is doing those dog whistles too, de facto encouraging people with guns to show up.
It's pretty clear that if Biden wins, that the overall threat of violence recedes, the plywood comes off the storefronts. People aren't worried about right-wingers wreaking havoc because Biden has won. But I think there would be isolated instances, probably of violence. But in general, I just don't see it happening.
Well, you mean once his victory is acknowledged by everyone, and he in fact is universally recognized as a president?
Well, there may be a few Brooks Brother riot type things in the interim while it's being contested. Yes. But in general,
it could conceivably get worse than that.
In general,
I don't think it will, but it could.
In general, everybody will breathe a sigh of relief, and they would not breathe that sigh of relief if Trump had won.
That's the virtue of Biden being the sedative that you worry about. I just think we could use. I think it'll be a couple of years before people are sick of a sedative.
It's the virtue of the. Imagine how pissed off the left would be if Trump, with a minority of the popular vote, was reelected again. That's what it has nothing to do with each side being intrinsically more violent, one side being intrinsically more violent than the other. It has to do with what the posture would be if Biden wins. Well, Republicans had their 4 years and now it's Biden and he won the popular vote. So what's the problem? If Trump wins, the left will just think, not without reason,
you acknowledge
that there are a bunch of mechanisms like the filibuster and the electoral college that are thwarting the will of the people, and they're going to get really pissed off.
You keep saying if Trump wins. I mean, you acknowledge he's going to have the most electoral votes by conventional reckoning. Right? I mean, by the time we quit taping, it may be Fox may have finally called Nevada, which again they would have done already in a normal year if they weren't afraid of offending Trump.
Fox has already called the whole election for.
No. I
think they did.
Unless it was within the last 10 minutes, I don't think they did. They had not called They're not called Nevada. They called Arizona, but not Nevada or Pennsylvania.
I think they call Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. Well, then it's official. Anyway,
you understand that that's the liberal Fox decision desk, Bob.
Let's go to the parrot room, Mickey.
They're run by traitors.
We will talk about all this in the parrot room. Final burst of self-promotion. The way to get into the parrot room, although that's certainly not the only reason to contribute to our Patreon at patreon.com/parrot room, is to contribute at blah, blah, blah. But also, we encourage what? We encourage rating and reviewing favorably, if possible, The Wright Show, which is where you find the audio version of this podcast.
Isn't that where you find the video version too?
Well, video, where they find it, would be either on YouTube, on the Blogging Heads channel, or on the Blogging Heads TV website.
Right.
The podcast, they can either find it in The Wright Show, along with one other one I do each week, or if they want a bigger feed, it's also part of the Blogging Heads TV feed, audio podcast feed. But no, video would, it would say The Wright Show somewhere on the video version, but it's not like you'd go looking under that rubric for the video version, whereas that is the place to look on your audio podcast app.
I won't say that I find that confusing, but
it could be less so. It is confusing. I admit. We're in transition, okay. which you approve of, right? Transition.
Ha 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 ha.
So
and let's. My closing pitch is: let's stop the ritual humiliation of Trump. If he loses, let him go. You don't have to.
Well, if he would admit that he's lost, it would be a hell of a lot easier.
Correct, but they'll feel they have to beat him up anyway.
Well, we'll see, but the beating up sure ain't going to stop until he quits acting like a crazy person.
Right. And leave Mickey alone.
Well, let's talk about that in the parrot room.
Okay.
But I will say Mickey's Twitter feed is at Kaus Mickey. Mine is at Robert Ryder. Mickey's newsletter is Kausfiles. And I'm too humble to mention my own. So, with that...
Your newsletter is Nonzero newsletter on Substack.
Oh, how kind of you to mention that.
And this is part of like wearing a mask, Bob. I help you, you help me. And mine is called Kausfiles on Substack.
Yeah.
And there's some Substack rumors we can talk about in the parrot room too.
Yeah, like we'll Twitter by Substack, for example.
Like that one, yeah.
And
okay.
Congratulations. The New York Times piece on that by Ben Smith mentioned you in the first paragraph. Am I right?
Well, that's right.
Okay, we'll talk about that in the parrot room.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
All right. See you around.
Bye.